Hi, this is Privateer Station, and today we're bringing you a special material. We're trying to branch into different areas. This one is somewhat related to war, of course, but it is a conversation on philosophy and religion and their role in light of war happening in Europe. It went rather deep. It is an interview that Alexey gave to one of the Christian TV channels over in Ukraine about a year ago when he was still representative of the office of the president. I'm not sure how many of you know, but Alexey's main business is a school of philosophy and thought and psychology sessions and helping his fellow citizens. He's also rather big on the front of philosophic thinking and religious thinking in Ukraine. So perhaps it'll help you understand the vector his messages are coming in his other streams, because this is what lies beneath, what lies deeper underneath all the news and fluff and the rest. And I think you guys will appreciate the depth of topics. Let us know in the comments. We appreciate your feedback. And here it goes. Enjoy. Good evening, dear friends. I'm glad to see you on our New Christian channel. This is our weekly I Have Seen God, and every time we invite interesting people who can speak to that topic that in their life they encountered, maybe many times, maybe just once, but they encountered the emanation of supernatural in their life, emanation of God. And today we have a very interesting guest. And what is most appealing to me is that you guys all know him. He's a psychologist, a philosopher, theologist, and of course also the advisor to the office of the president, Alexey Arestovych. Good evening, Andrey. Thank you very much for coming. I'm very glad. And several days in preparation for our interview, I watched a lot of your streams and videos on YouTube. Unfortunately, I couldn't find your book. Oh, the book, you probably won't find it. It was printed in a very small number. One was reprinted in Lithuania not long ago, but Castrated Gods, I started that one but haven't finished it. And my friends and fans published the first half, so that's basically whatever I had. They published just a part of it, so I need to finish it. I think you need to finish the book because, you know, reading the Bible, it keeps hearing the message. Write it down, write it down, write it down. Although you can also record it on camera. Indeed, I like the video recording way better. It's more operative, it's faster. So I talk on my lectures, and my recording is mostly done via video. All right. I'm very glad that you granted us your presence. I just came back from Kharkov today. I talked with a good friend of mine there, Gennady Makhnenko. He's a rather unique person. He is a father of 36 adopted children, a chaplain. There was even a movie made in Hollywood about him. Oh yeah, he is very well known. He is known for his activity in Africa, and yeah. So he actually expressed his opinion about Alexey Arestovych, and I listened to that. There's a video of it. Let's turn it on, and then we continue. All right, let's see. What did he have to say about me? Imagine, right? The father of 36. All right, so in the Second World War, sorry about the sudden parallel, but during the Second World War, in the UK and then around the world, there was a phenomenon of Staples Clive Lewis, the author of Narnia and other books, an Oxford professor who lived through a deep religious conversion, what, by the way, Alexey in his messaging does underline, that he also transferred from being rather secular to rather religious and philosophic character. So Clive Lewis, he became actually was in high demand on the radios of BBC in those times, under bombings, under missiles being shot from Germany, and with the news of and blood coming from the fronts, theological message of Lewis via the media were actually functioning as the staple, as support, as psychological support for the British nation. And later, from the cycle of these lectures by Lewis on BBC, was born one of the main books of the 20th century, in my view, Simple Christianity. I'm not sure that Fagin and Arestovych streams will take the same position in the world ontology, but the fact that during war, during all that blood and horrible things unfolding on the front, that theologist Clive Lewis was so in high demand in Britain in those times. He actually also had military experience. He fought in the First World War. So he lost friends, he had good experience from that war, he had skills, and he tried to return back to military during the Second World War, and he worked, basically, he was served as a territorial defense serviceman in Oxford, where he lived. So Alexey Arestovych was also going to return to the front on the 24th of February, but his plans were interrupted by the offer to work as a spokesperson for the office of the president, as advisor, and since then he is performing this function. So since 1941 to 1943, Clive Lewis was also broadcasting in the series of casts from London in the times when aerial raids were active. And at that stage of war, his streams were very cherished and valued and were very popular among both civilians and military. Something similar is happening on the YouTube platform with Arestovych and Fagin streams. And even though the streams of Mark Fagin are very far removed from being theological, and the world changed, it's not the middle of the 20th century, so of course it's difficult to find theological materials like that. And pure theological material cannot be just digested directly by the viewers. All right, let's cut here. So, first question to you, probably most important. You gave some suppositions, some ideas about the Crimea annexation, about the beginning of this war, the full-scale war in Ukraine. You actually discussed the vectors from which Russia would most likely attack. What is the source of this knowledge? Is it spiritual source? Is it perhaps some other more material connections with friends and colleagues where you could consult? Or is it a very well-developed intuition? All right. Look, I have different military specializations. One of them is actually called the estimation of military political circumstances. And there are certain laws there, certain elements that you can use to basically create a scientific foresight, if you want to call it this way. So if you see that your foes are deploying a strike group on your borders, and as a specialist, as a military specialist professional, you know that this group is a strike group, this one isn't, and you can see that this group is being deployed, their readiness will likely be complete by early 22, and then you can understand why is that happening, because nobody in the world is making strike groups without the need to use them, right? So that's one. Then you check with your intuition, and you ask internally, do you support the idea that the war will happen? Is there any objections? And then your intuition says, yeah. And then perhaps you ask the higher powers, are we to face the war? And you don't get any negative, any no from there. So sometimes you get this message via 3 or 4 or more channels. When I was recording those videos early before the war, people were calling me an idiot and were saying that I'm so out of whack. But yeah, here we are. You know, it often happens like that, because God doesn't act just on its own, and a human by himself is also rather limited. But when human and God unite in certain things, then when you get a certain almost supernatural-like understanding of events to come. It's difficult, Andrei, to determine the share of supernatural in this foresight. But every time I asked that inner something, it always answered me, there is nothing to stop it. So, of course, my logic was giving me some data, but when I was addressing this message to the irrational part of my internal channels, my psyche, it said, yes, it definitely is going to happen. So that's what I was talking about. All right, next question, also important for me. You're telling me that you were born in an atheistic family, or both of them were atheists, right? Well, they were not fully atheistic. They actually baptized me, right? Oh, they did. I'm sorry, I misunderstood your words. I think they were, right, they were respectful agnostics. So in my family, when they talked about God, it was with respect. But since in the extended family we do have two physicists, and since childhood there were conversations about the limit of knowledge, the limit of science, in a scientist's worldview, there is definitely a hefty share of skepticism in it. That's how science thinking works. I'm not even talking about the church discourse, even though church was one of the founding members of science, so to say. But since we did not have a vulgar atheism, like there's no God, but since it was Soviet times, these conversations were not really supported. It was just expressed as respect. But as for actual practicing of religion and theological discourse, that didn't happen. I was growing as a normal, in quotes, Soviet schoolboy who was told at school that there is no God and who was taught to laugh at the icons and anything church related. So, what the kid could do. Yeah, they were pretty good at Soviet Union about muddying up the religion and calling for people to despise religion and everything church related. So when did you get what we can call maybe enlightenment towards the understanding that God exists? Because as you say, God exists, but I take the concept of Christianity when I'm looking at different concepts. I always had an very artful imagination. So when I was reading literature, especially up until 19th century, the topic of God is definitely part of literature. And reading it, I could feel some truth behind it, behind this art. So when in parallel to studying at the Shevchenko University, I also went to the theater Black Square. That feeling sharpened up really and turned into some almost mystical feature. So in the Black Square, you basically play a play without a script. You come and face your audience, you invent your play and you play it live, and you also basically being a director of the same play and the scenario author as you perform it live. And this flow, that thing that goes through you when you do that, it is so different from your daily streams and daily vibrations that you feel. So right, you very often, when you get into very deep messaging, when it's basically cathartic messaging on the stage, when your public, when your viewers were definitely taken away and they were leaving the theater changed. So however you call it, high art, deep art, whatever. But it definitely has a flavor of hefty irrational in it, of some heavenly intervention, I guess, or participation in this creation. And these higher states of beingness, in the terminology of people who do not believe in God, they are kind of God-inspired, right? And it's difficult to pick a different term to describe it. But initially, when I was using it, I used God-inspired as the literary term, right? Not a religious term. Then I went to military, and since I did not have enough life experience, my friends in the theater also were telling me that, one of the better schools of life for a young man is military. So I listened. I joined the military, and it was difficult times. It was 90s in Odessa, rather complex situation psychologically and physically. So let's say for the first 2 years of that academy, I lived in barracks where they had no heat for the first 2 years. For 4 years, we were fed some basic barley grain food, and yeah, if there was any meat, it was probably from Soviet preserves of some frozen cows from 1950s. So it was rather rough school of life. And during the 4 years of my study on that faculty, 18 of my classmates, among my, there were several streams there, but yeah, 18 of us, of our people, died. Different reasons. Some fought, some had trauma during the trainings. I've seen the wounded, I've seen the dead, so there were a lot of very sharp situations there. And I've seen, probably what's important, people at different stages of breaking, at different stages breaking, how it was unfolding, because no family lives 24/7 like the cadets do in the barracks, because you're 24/7 in the same group. Even if you quarreled with somebody, even if you fought with somebody, the next hour you may both be on duty and you both will be armed, carrying rifles. So that was a very peculiar life school. That's where I started to think a lot about these things. And one of my friends' mom, she was a very professional psychologist. When I was on leave, I once happened to go with him to see her at their home, and she was a psychologist of such a deep, profound quality that she actually thought that psychology is, first of all, theology. It has relation to God and heavenly things, if you want to heal somebody's psyche. So that really planted seeds. And this is where I got really interested in this topic. This was not Christianity yet, but I understood at that time that there is a energy and information center inside the psyche of every person. There is no doubt everybody knows that center inside you. And if you really turn to it, it is the highest authority for you. This is what they call in psychology clear knowledge, when you just know things, when you don't need any proof to that. Later you can invent different kind of logical proof for that, but initially you get a message from that within. It's kind of like a child's dream when, there are no objections. When you want it so much, you long for it with your whole soul, and no criticism or disagreement can sway you. So that's what I discovered at those times. Then I was reading a lot of literature, Sufi, Hindu, Buddhist, Christian, all kinds of. Then this topic somewhat faded away to the back, and I was still studying psychology as official science. Then I went to Intel service. There, I don't think psychology and theology played much of a role. But then later in my studies, I went to the higher levels of understanding and the depth, deeper psychology of higher archetypes, Jungianism, neo-Jungian approaches, and it is considered to be scientific. Collective unconsciousness is a scientific term. The higher self is a somewhat controversial term, but it's accepted in psychology. So on this level, you dive straight into mysticism. And right, Jung was the child of the Protestant pastor, so he was exposed to that part of religious thinking too. And this is the fact there, the inner presence of God is almost never questioned in that higher level of psychology, because this is an obvious fact. But as for religious practices and orderly religious life, this is later. This came later. This is in Brotherhood of Dmitry Korchinsko. There was a practicing religious group. They had services and all, everything proper. And I discovered that I really liked the service and just participating in it, in the Sunday services. This is a very strong story that I discovered. I, at that time, already knew human psychology rather well. I understood the dynamics of it, and I've seen a lot of things by that time. So for me personally, what I liked is the practical side of it. And another interesting aspect, modern man doesn't go to service often, even though when you may believe in a God internally, you just don't go to church because all that propaganda created an image of sectants and people with narrowed mind, narrowed consciousness, who cannot stand by themselves, who need a ritual, or you get zombified and later you sell your apartment to donate all the money to the sect, right? So for the modern man who can believe in God 3 times over, it's a significant step to go to the church often. And I didn't want to make that step as well at that time. I was concerned, but when I braved enough to do it, I discovered that I actually enjoyed the services. And then it's my feature. Whenever I pick a topic, I usually dive head deep into that and explore everything I can. So there was time when I started working on the junction of philosophy and psychology, but at that junction you only find theology. You can call it individual philosophy or deep psychology, but in essence it's theology. When you look into the views and values of the person, yeah, that's what you face. And then I went to the Institute of Thomas in Kiev, and I didn't finish it. I'm really thankful for the classes I took there, but the war broke the plans. So when the war will be over, God permits, I'll return back and finish my training there. So, okay, Alexey, I saw you mentioned the scale of spirituality. I'm not a big of a theologist, but basically everything you talk about, I teach too. But I use different words, different vocabulary, more of a biblical terms, because I'm a preacher and I'm basing my message on the Bible. But the principle of that scale is essentially the same. For example, you're saying about the first level, 85% of population are people who are not integrated into spirituality, right? Yeah, they can use the terms, they can even maybe go into church, but they're not really connected to anything. They don't have inner world and they don't have their own spiritual world. So in the biblical terms, I think it's often called people not saved, so people spiritually dead. And they're defined as people who lack spirit. They have soul, but they lack in spiritual connection. So I put it this way, Andrey, God talks to them because they're still part of that matrix, but they don't really hear. Right, because when you reconnect that spiritual link, you grow, you feel the life differently, you feel more. Well, yes, first thing, Andrey, when you reconnect that link, you become way more ethical. Oh yeah, right. Some things that didn't bother you, you could actually offend somebody and don't even notice it. Now your rude word won't let you go to bed, and you'd be thinking how to resolve it so the person would not be upset whom you did. And the other manifestation is that you get keen intuition, and the person gets a feeling of the God existence. And that, just like you said, people enjoy being present at the service because they feel the presence of God. Right, it's a different experience that you don't get anywhere else, and that gives you a certain reason to continue. It gives you a different angle of view on life. Right, and also at the service you get a way to talk, to communicate with God, right? It's not exactly an exact communication, but it definitely is some form of communication. So that lack of integration on the lower level is basically the first level of that spiritual level, right? Yes. And this is unawoken spirituality, and it's difficult to say if it is spirituality because God never turns away from them, right? From these people. It just, they're not receiving it. It's about the cornerstone story. I don't know if our viewers know what the cornerstone is. When back in the days they were building a stone, they always started from the right back corner. Then they were doing the right wall, the back wall, and then the left wall in the front. And since the stones were not pre-made then, like proper rectangular shapes, So there were two schools of masonry. One these days is more like a proper rectangular shaped masonry, and back in the day they were looking for a better shaped stone that would be the foundation of the whole building, hence the cornerstone. It was considered to be a good luck to find a good stone like that. And God talks to the most non-integrated person deep inside, and people hear that voice among other voices and they just discard it. They don't consider it important. They think it's a very cheap, unnecessary, and useless accidental factor in their life. And only after making a big circle, they come back and pick again the stone and look at it and say, well, yeah, we actually saw that at the beginning. And that's when they build the cathedral of their soul from that. This is a very typical story. Everybody hears the voice of God, but the first impulse is to discard it. They don't consider it to be important. That's why I think Christ told us to preach, because we need to aid them to help listen to that voice, to find it. Right, because sometimes people need extra attention to that matter. This is the voice. Listen to it. Learn how to. And yeah, I want to elaborate here. A lot of what you're saying essentially is very similar to what the first message by John, I'm writing to you, children, fathers. Right, so maybe you elaborate more on your messaging here. Right, so by the time when I got into this, I already had a certain concept internally. I back then called a psychological entity, that inside each person there is a psychological core. That's the angle I came to theosophy, to religion. Was coming from a psychology level. It appeared to me that there are some inadvertent jumps and evolutionary jumps happening to the psyche, to the psychological core of the person. And the development happens in jumps. It's like a one-way membrane. And when you observe people changing drastically, right, when the philosophic principle is realized, when changes accumulate gradually but realize rapidly, when all of a sudden all that turns into an equality. And when you observe people from that angle, and I've seen many of them for decades, people who take classes in my school, whom I counsel, I see how people change internally. They become richer internally, more spiritual in our terms. What is the reason? And the only reason is that they start to listen to that inner voice. That's it. And when you start to orient, really, seriously start to orient your life around this messaging, around this voice, when you start to accept ethical instructions and strategic instructions coming from that source, then a person very soon becomes very mature, becomes more strict in a good sense of this word, more serious. And one of the first signs of that evolution is, how they put it, sudden increase and betterment of an overall humanitarian situation in his environment. So people start to enjoy his presence. I call it giving your personal Wi-Fi, when he's emanating that around him. And then the next step is when he starts to even speak with that inner voice, when he starts to use it, communicating to other people. For a while, that Wi-Fi initially is coming through the person, but he doesn't really control it, doesn't understand it fully. Is it at times of childhood or a teen? No. That's when you already are grown adult. So if you want to go through levels, the first one, you don't hear any voice. The second one, you get to the concept of pseudo-studies, some concepts that are telling him certain things, and some of them are maybe correct, sending him good messages, but he's not really integrated with them. So one can say he's following some teacher on that second level, right? Yes, sort of. So he needs some sort of a teacher who will take his hand and lead him to the spiritual world. Right, if he even goes to that spiritual world, because he can be enticed by secular ideologies, right? But yeah, same concept. Second, then when the person orients mostly towards the letter instead of the spirit that's present everywhere, then suddenly the person starts to hear that voice of spirit inside, and somehow the person finds it very important. He cannot yet control it, change it, converse with it, but he just feels it like, pinging and periodic communications. But it appears for the person that it's so important that he wants to be in that connection. He just cannot keep that connection ongoing. And it's very interesting to see. It's a very interesting level, but it's a difficult level too, because you need to go through a very deep spiritual growth internally to learn to see a spirit behind the letter, behind the form, behind the word. So one can say the conscience of a person is connected to these messages, to this communication, because if you feel yourself a sinner, you don't feel yourself well, you cannot get to that channel, right? Right. The person, the way it works there is that person believes miracle not when he sees miracle, but when he does it himself, when he experiences it himself, when he starts making those miracles himself. Not that he's walking on water or generating bread out of nothing, out of thin air. No, when simple things, when all of a sudden in a situation where before he would burst out with energy and rage and some emotion, suddenly he finds power to not do that, to not be swayed by emotions. That's really impressive for many people. And all of a sudden they have this capacity. What level it is? This is a third level, right? And there are some sub-levels underneath it. As the person goes and grows through them sub-levels, he's basically connecting dots into lines. And if initially you win 5 minutes from this world, then you can win 15 minutes, then you can win a couple hours, then maybe 2 days, then a month, and they eventually grow into a full line, and the person gains more power, more energy, to the point where the person understands that that's the only voice that he needs to listen to. And everything else is just symbolic aids, maybe, at best, or symbolic foes of that voice. And when the person takes upon himself the listening and obeying to that with that voice, that's when the person also feels it deeper and then eventually starts to speak with that voice, essentially speaking outwards with that voice. So this is fourth level. And the fifth, let me interject here. Apostle John, for the fourth level, told us, you are strong, you have won over the devil. This is the hot, strong level of winning over yourself, over the lower level vibrations. Right, in reality, this is basically a place where the person starts to manage his reality and his beingness. Not passions, not other things that are coming from nowhere, or we know where they come from, right? From the lower band, that's when they cannot control him anymore. And even if they temporarily may capture his attention, the person is able to quickly recover and return back to the path. There are not too many people like that. Eventually, I think all of us will be there. How many do you think? Oh, very few. I think for the country of the size of Ukraine, there may be several hundreds. But still, that's not enough. And the next one is the integrated psychology, what can be called as integrated psychology. There may be just singles at that level. I think for sure we can say, or I know that there is one person, that would be Skovoroda. If we take secular people, known to public, not religious people. There are probably more, but the one who stayed in literature and history, that's Grigory Skovoroda. What he was doing, how he was thinking. This is a very high level when a man has such a piercing aesthetic and ethical level of feeling that he is very strict to himself. It's like a sport of high achievements, high results, when everything is measured, the word, the tone, the message, and yet the person feels very light because he is in full connection with the source. At the same time, he's behaving very strict, but very light. So yeah, be smart as snakes and simple as doves, right? Yeah, that same message from Apostle John. I'm writing to you, fathers, because you learned of non-started. So you realize the presence of something that doesn't have a beginning, right? Right, so the person lives in that eternal light, ray of light, and moves with that light and gives that light to everybody around him. I do like your explanations when you explain with philosophic terms, theology. In essence, it's theology, but you're using philosophic and scientific terms to describe that. Andrey, yeah, on that level, everything is theology. If you dig deep enough, you will find theology. This is the way psyche works. You can like it, hate it, disagree with it, agree with it, but if you dig deeper, you keep finding times and times again the same thing. I always give a simple example. Let's say there is a worker, Vasily, sitting at home, dressed in his trainers, and yeah, his son comes home with bad grades from school, and he is sitting and thinking to punish the son for that or to express pity and support him. And in reality, in the depth of his psyche, and that's the way psychology works, he's choosing between two very high meanings of being just or being merciful, with the capital letters of J and M. This is a religious conflict in the psyche of a person. It's not even philosophical or religious. It's the deepest conflict inside. He may even not know about religious, but deeper inside, this is a core of spiritual choice. That's a religious choice, in essence. And every time such choice has a religious character, if you dig deep enough, because you're defining the destiny of the world. If you talk in quantum terms, then if I drink this glass of water, then the universe will always remain as a universe where I drank this glass of water. And if I don't, then this universe will always remain a universe where I didn't drink the glass of water. And that feeling that a human defines the destiny of the world with every step he takes, this is very sharply felt on that fifth level. So if you talk from the positions of theology again, God created the world based on the principle of faith. The first was an idea, the second was word, the third was a Holy Spirit that was creating everything that's living on earth. God instilled the same principles inside each person, right? Right, because we learn the world and we work with the world with the same instruments that the God used to create it. First is an idea, second is word, third is action. Spirit, soul, body. The same principles work inside each human. So if the Bible says you are gods and you are sons of God, right, one understands that may be a bit uncomfortable if you go outside and declare yourself a god. People will call you insane and schizophrenic. But also there is Vasily the Great, who said that the god became a man, so the man could become a god, right? It's a biblical phrase. The Son of God became the Son of Man, so that sons of man will become sons of God. Exactly. That's an exact direction of a path. It's basically pointing towards that. The human was created to become godlike, and this is the path. And there's another example I want to give to people with especially technical background and physical and scientific background. So when Christ is rising, he's being asked, who's going to be working miracles instead of you? He is answering, you will do more miracles, but that's not even the main thing. You'll do even more. So he managed to revive the dead or walk the water. What will we learn, right? What miracles will we be able to do? But then I'm telling them, imagine that 3 centuries later, and creating a new galaxy, for example, is now a diploma work for a university graduate. So you created a new galaxy, but your inner problems, what happened to them? What's with your psyche? What's with your conscience? What's with your spirit? What with your mind? Are you better now? Are you liking your close ones better? You getting upset less? Right? If you learn to walk on the water and revive the dead, technically, have you evolved personally? Inside. So what's more precious? A way to know how to emanate certain miracles, or to grow internally, spiritually, to work a miracle in your soul? Because that is, I think, a crucial question. Today we have 12 million of refugees, right? Our compatriots who left or moved inside the Ukraine. And people that I talk to, they're telling, the most awkward thing is when you come to a new place, not that you don't know people, don't know language, but when you look in the mirror, you see the eyes of the same man who left, let's say, Kharkov, and who brought all the problems with him to a new place. You can give $200 billion to a human, and what? and nothing. You can teach person to revive dead, to create new galaxies, and then what? What's inside? What's with that person? That's where these priorities are defined. And a very simple explanation, if we take Descartes, who created the philosophy of new time, it was a Frenchman sitting by the fireplace. He is getting the wine from the ice, and the wax is covering the top of the bottle. So he takes the wax off, warms it up with his hand, it becomes pliable, then he throws in the fire and it disappears, it burns. So he's thinking, the wax went through 3 states, from cold to warm to liquid, and then it's gone. He's thinking, if all the wax on earth disappears, all the material wax disappears, there'll be a word, an idea of wax left. So the idea is stronger than, he concludes, is stronger than the material. So his message then turns into, okay, ideas are stronger than material things, practically indestructible. And on the next level, it means that idea has more reality than matter. Right? So one way or another, the idea cannot be destroyed. It's more real. And the soul is the idea of a human, as Plato mentioned. So imagine something happens with our bodies, and developments in medicine will allow us to live for 500, 600 years, 900 years. What's up with your soul? Yeah, you lived 1,000 years, but what happens to your soul then? Yeah, Methuselah lived for 960 years, and that's all that's mentioned about him in the Bible. Right, that he lived for 960 years, that's it. But what was in this life? Nothing, not worth mentioning, right? Jesus lived for 33 years in his body and only 3 years in service to God. And we're still talking about it 2,000 years later, and we'll probably be talking about that 2,000 years after. And remember, do not look for treasures on earth, look for treasures in the sky, in heavens. And quoting Arthur Clarke, most advanced technologies are indecipherable from magic, but they don't really do anything to your soul, with your soul. And if that evolution doesn't happen, then any other evolution has a subservient character to that primary one. I would even say destructive, perhaps. My teacher who taught me psychology, he had a great phrase that he liked to use. In a strange manner, even the development of nuclear arms haven't blown away the belief of people in the capacity of their rational thinking. So we Christians, as I know many people think like that, we see God's message in Bible, in Scripture. For you, what the Bible is? Well, many things. I read the Bible even when I wasn't thinking about God. So first of all, it's a big aesthetic treasure. You can be atheist triple over, but the beauty of word, the beauty of story, it's a rather genius book from the point of view of art value. There is not a single non-genius place in this book. Just that can cause some people to stop being atheist if you think about it. And how many pieces of art were based on Bible? Literature, songs, poems, paintings. Even if to think as an honest and intellectually honest atheist, you can still read the Bible and reaffirm that it is genius. It is artfully genius everywhere, in every place of this book, which was written by a consensus that by many people across hundreds of years. They were just writing about the same, but a lot of different people across ages gave the same level of ingenuity. And somehow that whole line about Old Testament, New Testament, somehow that was all put in the Old Testament before New Testament was written, and that in the Old Testament there are reflections of New Testament which wasn't even written at that time. So you can ponder, how was it logically possible? First is logic chain of events going through the ages, through that book. And then what Dmitry Kaczynski said, that Bible, you feel that it is almost written by atheists. There is no attempt to better things up to make them look a bit better. Even on the first couple of pages, you read two different stories of creation. Nobody even tried to make sure that they are connected and everything is very smooth. There are two different stories of creation. There are some sons of heaven who also appear there and then disappear. Then there are four canonical evangelical stories that were not coordinated between each other. In the book of creation, the God creates human and then all animals, and then in one page later, he created all animals and everything on earth, and then human as the crowning creation. So nobody tried to get this all together, brushed into a single story. It is a collection of stories. And especially when you read about the life of Christ, when he was already arrested and getting prepped for the execution, it's a very piercing knowledge about the human psyche on those pages. And what impressed me personally is that Christianity is some very piercing truth about life and about human. So for me, it was very interesting as a psychologist, because people like illusions, they like to hide behind them. That helps them to survive. And sharp truth about life can only be afforded by very strong people. And I saw that in Christians, that they are not trying to hide, they're trying to see that piercing truth. And from that standpoint, Bible is a sort of encyclopedia of a real human being who, like Peter, can fly all the way to ethical level of heavens, then 3 times fall down, and then catch himself falling and return back. So everything just like in life. There is no other human except Christ who is portrayed as ideal in the Bible. Right? I remember Moses, when he was trying to evade this mission, he was trying to say that is probably more a better candidate for that. I cannot speak well. So it all was impressive for me. As a person who is fond of human psyche, human behavioral aspects, it was very impressive how it is described. And then when you start reading with some knowledge from theology side of things, and when you read more details into the scripture, then you understand it on a lot of different levels and uncover a lot more nuance, not for a wide audience. Prayer. Okay, prayer. Your interpretation of it. I actually liked it. Maybe you can repeat it for our viewers. Is it the one where I said that human needs it more than God? Yes. Well, the main idea, and I discovered that in my psychological practices, that appeal to God is always beneficial for human. Just sending your attention this way as well. On the micro levels, you can see how things are changing. His posture changes. Even atheist. Right, sugar normalizes, pressure normalizes. Right, if you can really be observant, you can see that without any measurement, right? Systemic, regular appeal to God changes human drastically on the inside. If you take my personal example, when I went to university, I was very skeptical to a degree, because all these monks with beards, they live in a very specific layer of our society, in their own world. They are very fond of what they do, and I was thinking they might be indoctrinating us, basically. And they were not. They were just offering us knowledge and offering us information for consideration. And since I was a sort of a warring atheist at that time, I would very often ask Christians, hey, can you show me something, 2,000 years after Christ, any miracle you guys can do? And they would, or you've seen, and some would mention some guy in Spain or somebody healing during service. But then I understood that the main miracle is not in this. The main miracle is inside. When you start learning that, you're becoming better on the inside. The moment you start thinking about that, reading about that, and send your attention to that area of reality, you're becoming way better, because we are often tempted by what we know as sins. And we are basically, from the get-go, we are sort of doomed. We are on the escalator that's going down, so it takes effort to stay on the same level, but to go up, it takes double level of effort. So as a psychologist, I know the amount of work the person needs to exert on himself, herself, in order to advance. And then you have a book that just makes you better by the fact of reading it and holding it in your hands. And that already is an impressive difference. I could compare the amount of work you need to work personally, or what happens when you're holding the book and reading it. And that dynamic really impressed me. Because, for example, a 2-year-long effort on the level of psychology and attention to your being could equal maybe a chapter from Bible, reading a chapter. And then another question was, why prayer, right? Because when we're turning to God, there are different things there, right? There are one thing that we're asking for, and there is another thing, what we really need, because we may be asking for rest, and God may think that it's time for us to do more work. So why prayer, right? And then I understood it, because we are in the interpersonal relations with God. The God is an entity, and we are entities. It's a communication between persons, and we can address to God on a first-person basis. And actually, the Bible tells us that we are His children. And in ancient Aramaic, Ava, used for God, is not even father, it's daddy. Because father can be a strict figure who judges you, but daddy is the one whom you can get on his back and ask him to play horse riding, right? Just like the kids play with their parent. Pillow fight and all, you can lean on your daddy, you can sit on his lap. And when Christ is telling that we're all children of God, and he is using the term daddy, this is the big turning point in the whole history of human relations with God. And then the next question is, why do we talk? What do we talk about with Dad? Right? Why not to talk with Dad? That's probably a better question. Exactly. That's why it becomes rather clear the life of a person will definitely benefit from continuous communication with Dad, because it is important. People who like scientific worldview, I can put it this way. Look at this universe, galaxies, huge spaces, billions of worlds, and the God is the creature that made it all into beingness with one gesture. He can create hundreds more like that, and he can uncreate hundreds. And that creature with a horrifying, magnificent level of power allows us to turn to it by daddy, dad, right? Colleagues, this at least poses a very curious element to all this picture, right? Even if you are not a believer, that becomes a very interesting situation. And I'm not even talking about Jerusalem syndrome, when you start to talk to God and he starts to respond to you. But when the person concentrates on it, there is sort of a magnet appearing in his soul that concentrates all the effort on the better things in this world. So when we are in a prayer, we concentrate on the best things in the world. We're fine-tune ourselves to that. And when I'm explaining to an atheist what God is, I'm asking, so have you seen anything amazing in your life? Maybe a sunset that was fantastic, that pierced you to the bottom of your soul. So this is just a small fraction of what God is, because God is all the beauty of this world. This is the easiest message. Anything beautiful that you see that really touches your soul, this is just a small glimpse at God. Now imagine everything through your life. This is just a shadow of God. Everything beautiful. So turning to that, what will happen to you? Right, you'll start mimicking that. Even Greeks, who were polytheists at that time, there was time in Athens when there were more statues than citizens, as people were saying. And why they used it? Because statue was sending a message, was depicting a state. So the human could look at the statue and feel what it is about, right? You could study about philosophy, what it is, and then instead you could also show them the genius statue of a philosopher. And that's what it means to be a philosopher. Right, that was a talent of a sculptor to be able to send the main message through his creation. So as an athlete, right, you could understand that you need to pump your muscles, but where do you get the state of spirit of an athlete, of a champion? Then you could look at that creation and feel it and get it. But this is just an image, this is just a statue. And instead, we also have a spirit we can turn to, right? It can produce more reliable miracles than that, which is much better to turn to source than to all the earthly copies of that source. That's why the prayer is so important. At some point, I wanted to write a course paper. Remember when the road to Emmaus, when Christ has already risen, and there were two people walking, and there's a third person joining them, and they're discussing the fact that he has risen, and that the third one walked with them, had dinner with them, and only later they recognized who he was. So I wanted to say that when you touch Lord with your right shoulder, he's basically always with you. We're always in that situation of presence. That theology of presence basically talks that you can always verify your deeds with God. Just to see that he is standing behind your right shoulder and ask him, run by him. Right, so this is a triunity of Lord, one on heaven, his Son next to him, and the Holy Spirit that would also be here with us. So on the levels of spirit, of soul, and of material being. And in essence of Christianity, what it is belief in Holy Spirit, that it is around you. Right, and I'll send you the Holy Spirit to support you. And the only sin that's unforgivable is sin against Holy Spirit. And here we can take a technological approach. This is like Pascal's challenge, but from the point of view of psychology, religious practices are one of the best way to self-organize, to self-evolve, even if you don't believe in God. They aid in your interpersonal development and betterment oneself as the person, even if you disregard the religious aspects, the formal religious aspects, because human learns by likeness. Concentrating your attention on something beautiful, on something clean and pure, you become better. Even if you do not believe that this is an advantageous and whatever story it is, it just happens. And if you do believe, it's double that. Alexey, I have a couple more questions. Church, as you said, it was criticized quite a bit in the last couple hundred years. Yeah, probably 300 years. It started with the Enlightenment, roughly. Because now it is what? 2023. Let's say there was probably a growth, a spiritual splash and spike starting in the 90s when USSR fell apart. About 30 years passed. Yeah, sorry, must be true. And despite all the spiritual growth in the country, in post-USSR environment, we still have a lack of, let's say, religious-themed journalism that would bring a little closer the religious stories to the society. And it should be present in crisis moments, you're right. In the moments of crisis, as you know, during the times of war, we have a lot more people who identify as religious. And yeah, everybody grows when it's a difficult crisis. Now, yeah, and great, we have more Protestants and more other denominations. What is church for you? Depends which angle do you look at that. From religious standpoint, it's the body of Christ, right? But if we talk from the point of view who believe but who do not go to church, right, the ones that you talked about, for whom even going to a church is a significant step. So, from psychological point of view, life for human is a collection of different states. And subconsciously, we're looking for states that inspire us, and we try to avoid, or if we're healthy and smart enough, we are avoiding the states that destroy us, that are uncomfortable for us. And the best state, in my mind, that we can have available for us is during the church service, regardless if it's Catholic, Protestant, Orthodox. This is the richest state. Why? Let's describe it for atheists. First of all, you are in the same stream with a lot of other people whose attention point is also in the same area, and you both are there experiencing some synergy. Many of you like to go watch football or other sports in a stadium, and that's what you feel there at the stadium, a joint energy. This is just 1/100th of what you can feel during the service in a church. And another thing, you cannot quite lie in the church. And again, you can probably, if you intend to, you can probably do. But during the service, generally, any falsity in the voice of preacher can be read by his pastor. And it is a very unique experience and rare these days when you communicate without lies, because a lot of social interactions are based on lies. A lot of templates are full of lies, and very close interpersonal relation that would not have any lies in it is pretty rare. As a preacher who is actually a practicing one, I want to tell that every time when you feel inside that you were not fully truthful inside, or when you spoke something that you have not lived through, that you do not fully experience or fully agree with, you recognize that and you feel that and you feel sorry about these things. Right. So the experience of honest interpersonal relations is pretty rare. And trust some, you can object to that, but as a person who've done a lot of different things, 47 years old, my life experience tells that it's very rare. It is doable on the seance with a trusted psychologist who can create a very trusting atmosphere. And another question would be, if your psychologist is ready, are you ready to open up? And it can be only in some rather intimate situations which cannot be programmed societally. When you ride on a train with somebody whom you haven't met before and will probably meet never again, or maybe with close friends when you gather after a long time of not seeing each other. And even if vodka is involved, this serves mostly to actually open up, to help people open up and loosen up a little and speak their minds. So you're mostly describing Protestant church, right? No, it's the same thing. I've been also at the Catholic services and Orthodox services. The liturgy may be a little different, but in general, first of all, you're not even let in without confession, and confession is a strong story. And everything is under a magnifying glass, or it feels like. I can tell you a very interesting story that happened to me in Georgia, the country. I was traveling there with friends of mine, and we somehow got in a church where the wedding was going on. And it's an old, beautiful church somewhere near Tbilisi. The Georgian choir is in the background. Everything is beautiful. The monks are there. And the youth that was being married, they're of a hipster kind, almost with green hair, blue jackets, and, colorful boots. And one guy was standing there. He just got taken away by all the singing and the experience. And he's like a bearded guy, all colorful dressed, and he's closed his eyes and feeling into that. And then somebody was passing by and inadvertently pushed him a little. And he kind of clicked out of this, and he was really trying to get back to that state. And you could see that he was really trying to get back to that, what he was experiencing. And then the monk came by and told him something, and the guy almost felt like an electric shock and went into deep thinking. And I approached that monk later and asked him, hey, what did you tell him? That was very impressive from afar. And he said that it's a sin to pretend that you're feeling what you're not in the church. And this is what shocked this guy, or rocked his world rather substantially. And I think he understood that they went to church only because of tradition, not because you feel that it is important. And that's what you feel in the church. You feel all the falsities, if they exist. And once again, to get an experience of honest interpersonal relation, a modern world can get easily in two places: when you're praying and when you attend a service. Because you can attend church at your will, right? And I'm talking about events where you can get this experience at your will. You can pray at your will. But even if you're talking about psychology session, it takes an effort. It takes a good alignment of stars to get the right psychology expert, to get the good day when you're ready to open. And as an expert on these questions, I want to say that it's rare. That synergy is possible, but yeah. And right, imagine achieving it every Sunday, right? Today I had a conversation with a guy. He's from our church, from Kharkov. He is a commander of a tank company, and he was released for a couple of days to visit his family in Kharkov, just for a little bit. And he was telling me it is problematic. We left Bakhmut. Many people experience stress. Many soldiers are in depression, in a pretty bad state. He's saying, I'm preaching actively in my troop, and his call sign is chaplain. So in my company, everything is generally okay, but I see our companies left and right, and it's not good there. And I asked him, what about psychologists? You have that service right there. And he's saying there's a problem. It's not easy for people to open up. And that idea of a chaplain service that is actively being promoted in our troops now, and there's still a lot to go, but it's a good start. I think it's important for people to be able to open up, because 90% of the problem is resolved when a person can relive that experience and can speak to it, right? Yes. Because even Greeks opened that principle, and they were not monotheists at the moment, but they understood that the spirit, or the entity, the person, is above everything. And they instilled that in every hill, in every cave, in every stone. So there would be a communication with everything, right? And they would try to communicate with all these spirits of nature around them. And it's very precious, the experience of an open, honest communication between persons. And maybe our viewers know, where can you get it so systematically with such a depth as they can do it at church, during service, or during any religious practices. And this is the most precious experience you can experience in life. In my life as a pastor, there are thousands, and really they're looking back, there are thousands of people who were dependent on drugs for dozens of years, who were crossed out of their lives by their parents and society at large. I've met moms of these children who were actually confessing during confession, and just talking to me and asking, I'm praying for my child to just suicide himself or herself, because it's a torture for them daily on the drugs. So it's an amazing experience when you see them finally coming to church, and many of them dropping their drug habits. When the God helps them get rid of that dependency, you see very talented, bright people. It's an amazing transformation you can witness. And the only thing that kept them enslaved is that drug addiction that they couldn't get rid of. And many of them get rid of it by starting to go to church. And people don't understand what the church is. Yes, that's true. Remember Victor Hugo, when the criminal is running from law, stops at the abbey, steals silver things from bishop, and then police catches him, brings him back, and bishop says, oh, you forgot the chandelier. I gave it to him as a present, everything. Please release him. And people from outside the church, they have a conception that it's impossible to fulfill all the commandments. And it's a difficult position, and the church will be punishing you and blaming you for not being perfect. So that's the point, often point you see from the outside. So let's explain how it works from the inside. Christ set a very high ethical level, but only towards himself. But when it came to other people, he was always merciful. Go and do not sin. Or the first one who doesn't have sin, who has not sinned, let throw a stone. Right? That's always an experience, a different experience of merciful. Why church actually is welcoming to villains? Why it's more difficult for a common citizen, right? But for the villain, because villain always has something to confess. By the way, I have a big experience of working with prisons, and it's so easy to preach and work with prisoners. You just start communicating, and they speak up. And people often, right, they have a lot of experience of being expelled, being punished. That's the only experience they feel for the most part of their life in that environment of prison and all. And when suddenly they see a group that expresses love, that invites them to join and live life with others, this is not even psychology. This is something very high on the psychological scale, religious scale. Because there are very rare social situations when a billionaire can be on the same pew with a drug addict, and who would consider each other, or ex-drug addict, and who would consider themselves brothers or sisters, right? And maybe a ex-con on the same pew. There are very few places where you can experience that. So one would probably be any performance, right? Movie, theater, sports. Second is army. So that's during military situation when there is a full draft and everybody can find themselves drafted, right? When it's total mobilization. And then maybe a hospital and church. And that experience of an open interpersonal communication with full acceptance, despite however many crimes you've committed, this really shatters people's chrysalis, their worlds that they stuck in. And so communicating with atheists, I'm telling that you will be hard-bent to find that place like that. Thank you so much. It almost sounds like an advertising, but thank you for this conversation. Our show is called I Have Seen God, and here probably this question would be kind of inappropriate, right? But maybe I can ask you about the miracles that you have seen. Oh, yeah, I've seen quite a few. So maybe objective and subjective, something in the scale of our country and something in the personal scale, as an example. Maybe you can talk about that. A big miracle, country size, country scale, the best military experts a while recently gave us only 3 days to exist. And they gave 3 hours for our aviation to live. And they're actually growing, they're getting experience, and they're fighting. Nobody believed that we as a country would be able to resist. And even the believers had their concerns, but we did, right? And personal, I had a time in my life when psychologically I was in a very bad place. One storyline broke and I really wanted it to be back, and I appealed to God and promised him everything if that storyline will mend itself together. And he said, no, I won't. It won't. You do not need that. And I howled. I tried to, as a wild animal, to run from the trap, leaving my fur, skin, limbs, and the Lord said no. And that's when it dawned on me that if that storyline came back, it actually would be worse for me and for all the participants. Every psychological trauma can be relieved and quieted down in a year and a half. You'll be in a better shape. But when the Lord stopped me, held me from jumping into that storyline again, that was a miracle for me. And right, the believer actually learns to understand that messaging both when the Lord gives and when he doesn't. And yeah, in my case, when he cautioned me from getting it, that was a very eye-opening moment. Do you have a short message for our viewers? Mostly it's, our channel is a Christian Protestant channel, maybe not too wide of an audience, but, well, what we've been talking about now, it doesn't matter exactly about the kind of audience that watches you. I think it's going all across. I would say, brothers and sisters, times pass, but the values remain. And in modern world, it is very difficult to be openly religious because people are shy. They do not like bringing it up. Yeah, I kind of believe, but I'll never go to church. And it takes a certain bravery that actually looks honorable on all men, women, kids to go to church, to do that. And I appeal to continue carrying on that. And do not be in defensive mode. Do not be shy about that. Just witness to who you are. And if you witness God in front of people, the God will witness you. This is one of the truths that's still active these times, especially when societally religion is still somewhat prosecuted, despite all the changes. Especially when you go, on Sunday somewhere, people smirk at you saying, "Oh, you're going where? To church? There are so many other things to do." But those people from the capital P who find in themselves to go to a service regularly, I don't know how much I can affect you, but I just want to reaffirm that this is a good thing. Good thing you guys are doing. And despite of all the concerns, just remember who you are in life and what it serves in your life and who your close ones, who your real brothers and sisters are. And thank you for coming to the stream. Thank you for talking to us on the border between religious and philosophical terms. Please continue. Yeah, this is my kind of specialty. It's interesting for me to bring people from outside the religious world into this one and show them that, hey, there are a lot of great things there. It actually is for your betterments. And we're talking about their psychological health, their personal health. Well, thank you for being with us. Let God protect you, your family, your children. I understand your mission is not an easy one. It was and it is, and it likely will continue. And thank you for being a person during the last year who was bringing faith and hope to people. And even if some predictions did not come through, at least people still hoped. And this is probably more important than when certain things happened or certain things didn't. If people believe and hope, everything is possible. And bringing that into their world in these difficult times, I think this is a brave act. It's a mission, right? That's probably the right word, to keep bringing faith. Because I think faith is probably the most important thing, right? It is. And these 3 days that everybody said you don't even have, and then these 3 days turned into 3 months and more, it was very important to continue bringing hope and faith to people. Because people often lose it. And given that non-stop stream of negative information, what people saw, what they lived through, they see all these explosions and missiles flying over their heads. Bringing in that glimpse of hope is a great mission. Thank you so much, and let you be blessed. Thank you too. Thank you for this conversation, Andrey. Thank you for the opportunity. Dear viewers, thank you very much for being with us at that time. Let the God bless you. Please subscribe to our channel. And a side note from Privateer Station, even though I do not personally belong to Christian tradition, I did find this conversation an important one to translate and bring to you guys. Thank you.